Hi, I'm Kashonna Marrow, and welcome to Accelerate Your Destiny. I am here with my guest. I'm welcoming her back. Her name is Lynda Katz Wilner with Successfully Speaking. Thank you again, Lynda, for being here with me.
It's my pleasure to be here with you, Kashonna.
Lynda and I have done so much work in the DEI space, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have a different angle, if you will, to diversity, equity, and inclusion because we understood that there were so many people, so many organizations who were looking at policy and what did they need to do to incorporate this practice, if you will, and initiatives in their organizations. But we had a little bit of a different approach to it. Could you share, Lynda, what we decided we would do?
Yes, we had a different approach because I'll mention that it went back to a time where I was working with a company on listening skills. And all of a sudden, and this was in 2020, they came back to me and said, "Can you also talk about DEI?" And I thought, well, I could if I had an expert to speak with. And that we knew each other.
Yes.
And that's when we came together and we saw the magic in our skill sets, in that I'm a communication specialist. I coach people, but I'm also a speech pathologist. And I focus a lot on communication and listening, and you do as well, and speaking. But when we came together, we realized that there's one element that we had in common.
Yes.
And that was that we used the term pause when we spoke about it.
Yes.
So before we go into the acronym on what that means, I just love that because you said to me, well, how do you use pause?
Right. We had two different ways of looking at it.
Well, why don't you go first, Kashonna, because you're the one in charge here.
Well, no. I love that. And it's a conversation. And I think that that's the beauty of how we work together. We bounce off each other and we have these wonderful conversations and we get excited. So we have to make sure we contain ourselves while we're interviewing today. But when I looked at pause, what I said was there was an opportunity for us to engage in our thoughts before we engage in conversation. So at the intersection, if you will, of thinking, before you speak, pause and make sure that you are aware of who you're talking to and what you're going to say. I want to say cater your words, if you will, to the person. Make what you're saying palatable to the other person, and that's important. Now you thought about it another way.
Because yours was more calm down.
Yes.
Get a hold of yourself.
Yes.
And mine was when you're speaking, you want to pause for several reasons. One, which is very similar to yours, is it gives you time to think.
Yes.
Because we say things quickly and we sometimes regret it and we can't take it back. So pausing gives you time to think, but it also helps the listener understand what you're saying. And I've worked with many non-native speakers of English, and they found that they want to keep talking so that they sound very fluent, and in doing so, you can't really hear the whole message because you're drinking from a water hose.
Yes.
And when you pause, you think better, and your audience follows you better. And that was how I was using pause for the effectiveness of communication and the clarity of the pronunciation as well as the message. Yes. And so we both looked at pause and thought they were different, but they work so well together.
They work very well together. I love when we look at DEI and we look at how diverse our organizations are. People come from diverse backgrounds. They have different exposures and different experiences. And because of that, they got into this workplace. And they found a lot of tension in the workplace, which made it very difficult to have effective conversations because there were some people, and you have to go back to our previous episode and find out about communication, but we found out that people were not listening. They just wanted to get their points across, and that was it. But we found out very quickly that you had to listen in order to be a diverse culture, an inclusive culture. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's not all about my perspective.
What?
Really?
Excuse me.
I think it is, because everything I say is important. That's how we think.
Right.
But it's not all about that. And so I have to find ways to include other people's information and be a good listener.
Yes.
And that's why we've talked about DEI conversations. It's not a matter of teaching people what to do, but it's more open up the conversation so we can learn from each other. And Kashonna, you and I have done that over the years. The conversations we've had have educated both of us to understand some issues better than it would be if I just told you what I was thinking and it's my way and that's it.
Yes, on and off the record. We've had wonderful conversations, even just outside of the classroom where we've had candid conversations, and those conversations have led us to a much closer, I think, relationship.
Relationship and understanding. I've learned so much from you over the years.
As I from you. I think about those opportunities that are in the workplace that people have and don't even know that they have them because they won't listen, or they feel like they already know. I've been there, done that. One of the things that I hear people say a lot of times is, well, that's common sense. Oh,
to some people.
To some, exactly. And I'm thinking, well, let's rephrase that. Let's reframe that, because what we don't want people to think is that what they think or how they feel does not matter. We don't want to make people feel like they are just kind of over there and we'll just get back with you as soon as possible. I mean, we can say as soon as possible, but we'll get back with you whenever. It's really not a dehumanizing, I don't want to say that, but it kind of discredits the other person's experience. And I don't think that that's fair. So what do we do then to make sure that we include them in the conversation? What if their experiences are different? Then do we just say, oh, well, your experience is not like mine and disregard them? Or do we bring them in and say, well, what can we do to hear you out and make sure that we find a commonality? Talk to us about that, Lynda.
And it's not just, if we have a diverse workplace, there is no one way.
No.
If you bring 5 people into a room, you're bringing 5 different backgrounds, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's religion, whether it's are you an athlete or not, whether it's what country are you from. And if you don't ask questions and have conversations, then you don't know anybody else's perspective.
Yes.
You just asked me, so it brings us to the acronym, the PAUSE, because PAUSE isn't just about pause. No. That's the P in the acronym. And so we have the P for pause. We have the A for acknowledge differences, and that's what I just mentioned. You need to acknowledge that of those 5 people, there are differences. And our brain, as we've talked about, is wired to see those differences, not the similarities. I will see, are you friend or foe? Should I approach you or should I stay away from you? Right. Or just be neutral? But our brain is wired that way. So we will right away acknowledge, we find a difference.
Yes.
So why don't we just acknowledge it?
I love that. I love acknowledging, because we have done a great job at saying, well, I don't see color. And I think the intent behind that was a great intent. People mean well when they say that, but I want you to see color. I want you to see the differences and how beautiful those differences are. So
we're not all the same.
We are not all the same. Absolutely not.
Okay.
U.
So we have the P, we have the U, the A. The U is understanding biases. Now, a lot of people in DEI training, that is the big focus. They always will ask us, can you just teach us how to understand the biases or the unconscious bias or the cognitive bias? Well, we do need to understand it and know ourselves and know that every one of us does have biases.
What? No, Lynda, I don't have biases. I'm perfect.
Right, but aren't biases...
I love everyone.
Right, but aren't biases opinions?
They are.
And if somebody says you're being judgmental, I know I am.
Yes.
I am judging from my perspective, which happens to be a bias. But I think we think of bias as a negative term.
Yes, we do.
But it's really my perspective.
The danger in that, too, is if we don't address those biases, they lead to prejudice and stereotyping. And so we have to make sure that we understand what those biases are so that we can immediately disrupt them. Right. And then we can auto-correct, if you will.
And I think that's the key, Kashonna, because we want to acknowledge them and we want to understand them. But yes, you want to disrupt it, but there also are biases. And so you don't always have to apologize for it. You just have to know this is how you feel. Maybe I want to learn more, but this is who I am. Now, I can change, but I think you really want to open that conversation. Maybe there's a reason I have that bias. And maybe you could tell me that, Lynda, that's a good reason from your perspective, but broaden your perspective and understand it's not that way with everybody. And that doesn't happen unless you have a conversation.
Ooh. That's good. That's rich. I love that because you gave people permission to have the bias. Or to I have this. I feel this way. It's a preference. I feel this way about something, and it's okay for me to feel that way.
Yes, and I think the good thing is with two people, this could be colleagues at work. It could be friends. It could be family members.
Yes,
but you can call it out. Be careful where you call it out.
I'm glad you said that, Lynda.
In the workplace, you're not going to call out your boss for a bias.
Correct.
But even when you're having a conversation with a family member, you might say, wait a minute, that really sounds like a bias. And you learn from that.
Yes.
So it's not a bad thing. And I'm not saying biases are good, but I want to neutralize it a little bit to say it's an opportunity to have a conversation.
I so agree. Okay, so we have the P, the A, the U, and now the S.
Now with the S, remember I said the brain looks at differences and acknowledges these differences, but you want to seek commonalities.
Yes.
I may have a bias about something at work and the other person doesn't agree with me. What common ground can we find to agree? Maybe it's for the betterment of the company. Well, okay, if we can start there, that will allow us to have a conversation. But if we can't find any commonality, how do we communicate?
Well, it's difficult, Lynda. When you talk about finding commonalities, that requires work. Because I'm so busy trying to make sure that I get my point across and that you get on my side, that I'm really not looking for the commonality, or I don't make the effort to find it. And why is that? Is there a reason why we don't work to find those commonalities?
I don't know that I have the answer, but people have their agendas. I have my agenda. I don't have time to listen and get sidetracked by this conversation. Well, that's a very rigid person.
Yes.
We need the time. We need the effort. Because if we don't take it, it won't get us to the E, which is to educate each other.
That's it.
And so we can't just say, I don't have time to do this. It's my way. That's it. Let's go ahead. Then you're not dealing with a diverse workforce either because it's only your way. And perhaps the other person in the room has a better way. And if I would only listen to it and be a little humble and have some humility to say that maybe somebody has a better approach or a different approach than I do.
When you talked about that, I could not help but to think of how diversity was so, or has been so external. It's like, okay, well, yes, we want Black, white, we want baby boomers and millennials. We want, all of these things that people can see externally. But this focus is rather internal. It really challenges what we think or how we think and how we believe and what we do and how we do it. So I think that that's so important when we're talking about DEI. Yes, we want to see representation, but once that representation gets into your organization, how are you then handling it?
Because you can have that representation, as you said, the above the iceberg, as we often talk about, but it looks good. But is it working?
Yes.
And it won't work without conversations. No. And conversations only work if there's the giving out of the information and then the listening to the answers. And that's where we came up with the DEI Conversations. It won't work without the conversations.
When I think also, I'm going to go back to just pause and how I think about that as a whole, and these conversations that are happening in the workplace, some of them are happening and some of them aren't, to be honest. But when we see that the conversations are happening, people tend to get a little fatigued by this work. Because it's an uphill, they feel like it's an uphill battle. And I like to tell people, don't get tired. Don't get weary while you're doing the work. Just take a pause, breathe, but then come back to it. Allow yourself to regain the strength that you need in order to re-engage. But don't stop.
And Kashonna, as you say that, also, you can acknowledge that you're fatigued.
Oh, that's
Because
good.
chances are, if you are, I am too.
Yes.
And let's take a break and get back to this tomorrow.
Yes. Yes. Let's take a break and get back to it. Not take
Maybe
a
not
break.
tomorrow.
Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe next week or so. But also that's a great point. Setting a time that you're going to come back to it, because sometimes we can say I'll be back, but we never really come back.
And it's that once and done. You've talked about that often with these initiatives that we have for our organization. Okay, I brought Kashonna and Lynda in. We
Check.
talked about it. We're done.
Yes.
And you're always emphatic about that. You're never done. You're never done because somebody new comes in.
Yes.
Somebody has a bad day and does something on the team that changes and disrupts it. Nothing stays the same.
Nothing.
So you're never done.
You are never done. Yes.
If I can add to this, Kashonna,
Please.
we've talked about the pause model in relation to DEI conversations, but I love the model. It doesn't have to just be about DEI conversations. And I've worked with some groups. I've done some workshops. One example was women in hospitality, managers in restaurants. And I spoke about this. And when I came back for the second session, they said, oh my goodness, I used the pause with a disgruntled customer who came into the restaurant. I listened to them. I acknowledged that they had a different perspective. I understood that. And I sought a commonality, and it was okay. And they were fine, and they stayed as a customer. They didn't leave the restaurant. And I thought, how powerful is this pause? It's not just about DEI, it's about interacting with people.
Yes.
And having conversations and dealing with those difficult conversations that occur in the workplace, which may not be related to DEI. It may just be somebody who's a difficult employee.
I think a little bit different
Or team member.
about that, Lynda. I believe that it does relate to DEI from the standpoint of it all ties in.
True.
It all ties into diversity. It all ties into being inclusive. It all ties into belonging. It ties into justice. If you look, thinking about the J and DEI, JAB, so I'm thinking about all of those things. And yes, it is so important. Think about, too, if you're an entrepreneur and your customer is saying that they are right. Now, we all know that the customer is not always right. But we don't tell them that, but we're thinking it. How do you handle that customer? Are you patient with them? Are you kind to them? And even in teaching customer experience, sometimes that person has nothing to do, or that issue has nothing to do with you, but you're that person that happens to be on the other side of the phone. Or you're that person that they come into contact with first after they experience something bad. And so being that person, you figure out, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I have a choice here. Am I going to, tell them a piece of my mind? Am I going to respond without thinking? Or am I going to just listen and allow them to say whatever they need to say? And then I come back with an answer, or I come back with a, solution to their issue. And to me, that is a heavy part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because people have gone through so many pain points. And because of those pain points, this is how they show up at work. It's undealt with conflict or undealt with hurt and pain. And so they're coming to work and they're saying, this is all of who I am. Take it, and it doesn't matter whether you're prepared or not.
Well, you reminded me of a story of a situation where I did a workshop, and it was on public speaking. It was not on DEI, but you said DEI is in everything now. So we can't really separate the two. But somebody came up to me and said that I'm one of the graphic designers in a company, and when I sit in the board meeting, the team meeting, the head of marketing is so obnoxious. And he gets me so upset, and he's telling me what to do. And my biggest problem is I turn red in my face. Can you help me with that? And I thought, whew. But I bet that happens to people. And I said, well, this is before I did the pause. And I said, think about it this way. He thinks he's right. He's very confident in what he's saying. You may not agree with him, but understand that. and let that be who he is, and don't try to change it. Yes. And relax and calm down. Because if you change your perspective and say, Joe thinks he knows what he's talking about, I don't agree with him, but let him have his say. I report to him. It will calm you down. And maybe you won't get red in the face because that's a reaction. That's your body reacting to the stress. And so I think it always comes down to look at other person's biases or their perspectives, and you'll understand them so much better, and you won't have this animosity in the meeting. You may not still like the person, but if you believe that they're speaking from a point of view where they think they're right, that's their point of view. It's not yours.
It is their point of view and not yours. I think that is so important. Was it Stephen Covey that said, make sure that we listen to understand, not listen to respond?
Right, yes.
He stole that from us, probably.
Yes,
our
I think so. I think so.
Absolutely.
He hasn't credited us yet, but
exactly. We're waiting on that, Stephen. But I so appreciate this conversation, and I'm hoping again that it helps not only career professionals but also entrepreneurs, because DEI is in that work as well. Whether you're an individual or working collectively with an organization, everything that we talked about today is so important if you want to win in the workplace. So make sure that, again, you go back to our previous episode on communication and tie this all in, because it is threaded through everything that you do. So we give homework, of course, at the end of our podcast. And today our homework is, Lynda, we are going to challenge our audience to look at your conversations or think about your conversations within the last couple of months. And we said those conversations probably went a way that you didn't want them to go. So what are we going to have them to do?
Or there's somebody that we went right into that conversation knowing that it was going to be a problem. So if we think back on that situation, what did we say? How did we react? Did that work? And if we could rewind, how would we have responded?
Yes. What would you do differently? That is your homework for this podcast. Thank you again for joining us today on Accelerate Your Destiny. I'm your host, Kashonna Marrow. Until next time, I invite you to follow me on my social media platforms. I am on Facebook, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn. We have content going out daily for both your professional as well as your personal growth. I'll see you there.